This podcast includes information about Eastern Orthodox's Easter, and later, the Virgin Mary's 1914 and 1987 apparitions in the Ukraine. For many Eastern Orthodox Christian churches, our Easter typically falls 1 or 2 weeks behind the Western churches. But occasionally, Easter falls for us on the same day. It's nice, but more the exception rather than the rule. Then there are years like 2024, when we celebrate Easter very late. Our Easter this year is May 5th, for example, while the Western churches celebrate Easter on March 31st. Yikes, ours will be 5 Sundays later when we hold our Easter services. The reason for this is the Orthodox churches follow the older Julian calendar, whereas the Western churches use the Gregorian calendar. There are links on my website that provide explanations as to how this all came about. What I'd like to mention here, however, is this differing date provides an interesting challenge for when you fast for the 40 days before Easter. There is fasting like in the Western churches and additional prayer services for the 40 days before Easter, as well as almsgiving. In modern speak, this means doing some community service. We just do it at a later time, calendar time, but all our preparations are attempting to lead to the same noble ends as American Easter, as we say, which is trying to honor the sacrifice Jesus Christ made when he gave himself over to be crucified for all of us. Now, for me, fasting from my normal menu items can be challenging while out in the workaday world, where life is fast-paced and meals are typically grabbed on the run. Some restaurants do expand their menus and include fish during Lent, and other people from the Western communities are also fasting, so it's not so hard to get those meals. But when it's 5 weeks later, well, that's a different story. Are you a health nut? Are you on a diet? This brings strange looks as you try to explain, no, I'm just fasting for Easter. Ditto when you turn down an office birthday cake 5 weeks later than American Easter. I can tell you from personal experience, the people wonder about your sanity. And so when honoring the fasting, the additional praying, and the giving of alms a month later, really has the feeling of being very isolated from the normal world around you. Neighbors who've experienced Easter are dressed down doing yard work or cutting their grass and do a double take as you leave for church dressed up for a middle-of-the-week extra church service. But the isolation, being so far removed from the typical day-to-day routine, makes one feel very much off the grid. And I've grown over the years to feel fortunate that the solitude of isolation during these Lenten and Easter holiday prayer services really helps on that great day of Easter. Oh yes, another benefit for having Easter a month later, we get great deals on Easter candy. And now we begin the second part of this podcast, known as the 20th century apparitions of Our Lady of Hrushiv. As in our world today, the war in Ukraine crosses the 2-year mark. This installment, covering the timeline of history of the Virgin Mary since she passed on from the world, spotlights 2 contemporary apparitions known as Our Lady of Hrushiv in the years 1914 and then 1987. Hrushiv is located in the Ukraine. The Virgin Mary's association here goes back, however. It's worth noting that the Ukraine has had a special blessing over time because the country was dedicated to the Most Holy Mother of God in the year 1037 by Yaroslav the Wise. One quote from an apparition said, "The eternal God is calling you. This is why I have been sent to you. You in the Ukraine were the first nation to be entrusted to me. Throughout your long persecutions, you have not lost faith, not lost hope or love. I always pray for you." Unquote. One of her first visitations to the people of Hrushiv occurred in the year 1637 as signs of tension just before the start of the Cossack-Polish War in 1648 began. Though what occurred during that apparition is unknown, the people memorialized the event by planting a weeping willow tree at the spot. But why so much interest in the Ukraine? That's because the Ukraine is known as a vast breadbasket filled with natural resources and rich farmlands. This is what attracted her surrounding neighbors from the earliest of times. Now, at the end of the 18th century, under this willow tree, a spring suddenly appears, and its waters had miraculous healing powers. An icon of the Madonna was placed there, and her shoe soon turned into a place of pilgrimages. However, the governing bodies in the area, in an effort to keep control of the area, are said to have contaminated the spring, which apparently eventually made it fall into disuse. However, 60 years later, during a cholera epidemic, a villager there had a dream that the Madonna requested her to reclaim the spring, and this staved off the epidemic. Eventually, following still another vision, that of 3 tongues of fire over the springs, had the people build a chapel on the spot, and it was named Holy Trinity. It's here that the modern Holy Trinity Church stands today. As history moved forward in the Ukraine, it's now May 12, 1914, 2 weeks before the start of the First World War. The Virgin Mary appears to 22 farmers clearing a field near the Church of the Holy Trinity. All the farmers witnessed this apparition, plus more people came from around the region because the apparition lasted into the next day. First, the Blessed Virgin asked the people to pray, to fast, and to do penance. She is quoted as also saying, "There will be a war. Russia will become a godless country. The Ukraine as a nation will suffer terribly for 80 years and will have to live through world wars, but it will be free afterwards, unless people pray." Sometimes during the communist conquest, when the country was absorbed into the USSR, the site would be closed. To give an idea of what occurred in the Ukraine during World War I, I'll paraphrase Ornce Subtini, a scholar who wrote, quote, "Between 1917 and 1920, total chaos engulfed the Ukraine. In the modern history of Europe, no country experienced such complete anarchy, civil strife, and total collapse of authority. 6 different armies, Ukrainians, Bolsheviks, the Whites, the French, the Poles, and even anarchists operated in its territory. Kiev, the capital, changed hands 5 times in less than a year. The starving cities emptied as people moved into the countryside in search for food." Unquote. The Ukraine was then forced under the USSR from 1922 until the USSR broke up in 1991. And it was then that it once again gained independence, as predicted by the Virgin Mary in the 1914 apparition. Unfortunately, during this time period, the Ukrainians, as predicted, suffered greatly, including a mass Soviet famine from 1932 through 1933, leaving millions dead. And then there followed World War II. The Chernobyl nuclear disaster took place in the Ukraine on April 26, 1986. Exactly 1 year later to the day, on April 26, 1987, a young girl, 12 years old, Marina Kilzin, witnessed an apparition of the Virgin Mary at this same church. Marina told her mother and several neighbors, and they all saw the Madonna. Some descriptions said that there appeared a bright light that covered this church of the Holy Trinity. A TV report even recorded this light phenomena. Some said that within this, quote, impressive silver dazzle, unquote, over the church, the Virgin Mary appeared and floated above the cupola of the church. Like other apparitions around the world, at first a few people came, but quickly followed next by hundreds, then thousands of people who came from all over. During the first 3 weeks, tens of thousands of pilgrims reported seeing the Madonna and hearing her messages. It's estimated on most days as many as 55,000 people would see her at one time. Children saw angels flying. KGB officials and non-believers underwent miraculous conversions. According to John W. Hulk, who quotes from Michael H. Brown's book called Witness about a Russian mystic, Joseph Tirya, to paraphrase him a bit, quote, "The country has been devout in its faith and close to Our Lady and our Lord for centuries and centuries, long before anyone even thought of the concept of communism in the 20th century." And then another quote, "At Hrushiv in 1987, the apparitions were comparable in their visual impact to the excitement, mystery, and glory of Our Lady's apparition at Cairo, Egypt during the years 1968 through 1971. Yet there was one very important added quality to the apparitions in Hrushiv, some of which lasted for hours on end, day after day, where she hovered above the Blessed Trinity Church. She spoke to almost everyone who was present, tens of thousands of persons at a time. Our Lady spoke to almost everyone who was present to witness her appearances. Multitudes heard her heavenly voice, and she spoke to each person individually," unquote. But for me, this was one of her most powerful quotes from the 1987 apparitions. This quote from her says, "I have come on purpose to thank the Ukrainian people because you have suffered most for the Church of Christ in the last 70 years. I have come to comfort you and to tell you that your suffering will soon come to an end. The Ukraine will become an independent state." And also she said, "Teach your children to pray. Teach them to live in truth and live yourselves in truth. Say the rosary. It is the weapon against Satan. He fears the rosary. Recite the rosary at any gathering of people." The Ukraine did regain its independence in 1991, and it was just 3 years earlier than the Madonna had predicted in Hrushiv in 1914. Well, this is Nico Steves. I hope you enjoyed this installment. My book can be found using the title, The Very Fine Light, on Amazon.com. Please feel free to contact me at nicosteves.com. That's Nikos Steves, Steves.com. If you like this episode, and for more, share them with friends. This is Nico Steves. Thank you. See you next time.